So I would like to say something in advance, namely that English is my second language and I never really bothered to master some consistent accent because I have zero respect for this language and culture whatsoever. Therefore, it may annoy you a bit how I pronounce some things. I wanted to put this in a text-to-speech and call it a day, but it felt too impersonal, therefore it will just be my cartoonish Slavic accent against the world, and you just have to deal with it. Sorry not sorry. This video contains heavy spoilers for HBO's House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones, as well as George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood and A Song of Ice and Fire. I remember reading A Song of Ice and Fire while being way too young. I finished it right before season 5 started airing, so I watched the first 4 seasons and was mind blown with how good the show is. And then season 5 aired and I was like, okay, the drop of quality is significant. It was really bad. I was so disappointed with how they cut so many characters and changed so many storylines and rushed so many aspects of the story, and then used their go-to excuse that they've just run out of books and that's why they had to improvise. But this is not what happened. They had plenty of material from Fist and Dance, they just were uninterested in adapting it. And so they just cut it, changed it, simplified it, and overall made a very disappointing final product. But for some reason, everyone around me who wasn't a dreaded book snob still loved it. The show kept getting accolades, Emmys, and other awards, even though it was not only not good as an adaptation, it was also not good as a standalone story. And all those cracks kept appearing since season 5, then season 6, and even more during season 7. And then season 8 came out, and everyone was surprised. How could it end so badly if the show was so good for the first 7 seasons? Why did it drop in quality so much? And the answer is that all of the contradictions, plot holes, and changes in the story that were undertaken since season 5 just exploded in season 8. The show stopped being any good in season 5, and now that people go back to their rewatches, they sort of realize this too. And here I am, with the biggest schadenfreude, saying, I told you so. What is the point of this way too long intro that does not have anything to do with the clickbait title? Well, that while watching House of the Dragon, I had a déjà vu. I realized that it likely did not learn from the mistakes of its predecessor, despite all the hype around it, and is steadily heading towards a similar conclusion. And that fans, in their wish to redeem Game of Thrones, are willfully ignorant to seeing it. I don't think I have ever seen a book to film adaptation that was just okay. It's either the best thing you have ever seen or the worst. I think this is just the nature of the genre. You know how to make sure that your adaptation is bad though? Change everything about it to suit your own artistic preferences. Recently we had a surge of such adaptations. For example, The Witcher, where so many changes were made that people started suspecting that the creators have some vendetta against the source material. Somehow it turned out to be right, to such an extent that even the lead actor turned against them. If you are someone who adapts a book to a show or a movie, you need to realize that the only reason you are employed is because that book exists. The only reason why people want to watch your show is because they want to see the story they love come to life. The same is going on here. Sure, with House of the Dragon, you had a lot of show-only locals that hopped on the hype just because OMG, new epic dragon show, but it's Fire and Blood readers that made this story so popular that it was worth adapting. It was them who were hyping it up. It was them who will stay till the bitter end and won't throw it into the dustbin once the new season of Succession drops. So why do you do everything in your power to disrespect them when they point out flaws and inconsistencies that resulted from you changing the source material? Some changes in the adaptations can be really well put together. In Game of Thrones, Margaery being a full-fledged player was great, showcasing not only Natalie Dormer's talent, but also proving that D&D weren't always worthless hacks. But then again, they made another change that later came biting them in the ass, cutting Fagon's storyline, which caused a butterfly effect that got us Season 8. A wise man once said that sometimes butterflies turn into dragons. When making changes from the source material, something that you must consider is, will this change have a chain effect that will affect future events? Unfortunately, because Fire and Blood is an in-universe history book written after the dust of the Dance has settled, the showrunners also have plausible deniability for their questionable creative decisions. Fire and Blood is unreliable because it was written by biased in-universe historians. And true, many events in the book were somewhat vague. We do not get a definitive answer as to what was the nature of Criston's and Rhaenyra's relationship. We don't know if Criston intentionally killed Joffrey Lonmouth or if it was just an accident. Even the issue of the Velaryon boy's parentage is more vague considering that Rhaenys has dark hair in the books, so it could easily be explained that the boys just took after their grandmother. Do you know what definitely isn't vague in the books though? Character ages, the timeline, fundamental nature of the relationships between characters. Whenever someone says that they dislike the changes made to Alicent Hightower in the show, they get swarmed with people yelling that it's good that she was changed from her book counterpart, who was a one-dimensional evil stepmother. And true enough, she was that in the books. But if you want to add nuance and dimension to her character, there are thousands of ways you could do that without aging her down and making her Rhaenyra's childhood best friend. That alone causes the whole timeline to be messed up and various inconsistencies to creep in. As much as I like Olivia Cook's portrayal of Alicent, she was a miscast in terms of age. Somehow, she is only 1 year older than Tom Glyn Carney, who plays a son she gave birth to when she was about 17 years old. At least 20 years have passed since that moment, making her, at the very least, in her late 30s. Yet she is played by a 28-year-old actress. And no, that this is because she was a child bride argument doesn't work, because even if she was a child bride, she is an adult woman now, closer to being middle-aged than to being a child. I don't think they have retinol in Westeros. Aging Alicent down fundamentally changes her relationship with practically every character in the story. In the books, Alicent is 19 years old when she marries Viserys, who is in his late 20s to early 30s. A relationship much more equal both in terms of social standing and age. She is not a child bride and she is not pimped out by her evil dad. She is very much aware of how marrying Viserys will further both the position of her and her house. Book Viserys is also a jolly and kind person who, by all accounts, loves her and treats her with respect. Overall, Book Alicent should consider herself very lucky. There was not a single reason to make Viserys a pedophile and a martial rapist. Moreover, making Alicent a victim is detrimental to this story, since it changes the fundamental aspect of her character, that Alicent Hightower is the villain. No matter how you try to spin it, the original Alicent Hightower is the antagonist to Rhaenyra's protagonists. They are the leaders of their respective factions, the Greens and the Blacks. Not Otto or Daemon, but these two women. But the showrunners try to show her as a never-ending victim. Not even a victim turned villain, but an internal victim, a forever child bride. Not someone whose life's hardships turn her into someone bitter, but just an eternal victim. A passive woman who can only react to everything that is happening around her. And here lies the problem with her character. She is written to be extremely inconsistent, seemingly in an attempt to add nuance to her character, but all this does is to make her contradict herself in every step. Post-time skip Alicent shows that she is mean-spirited and focused on tormenting Rhaenyra, as well as doing everything in her power to turn her sons against Rhaenyra's sons. It seems that she gained consciousness on her own, is no longer just a pawn to Otto, and with him gone from the capital, she is actually playing the game herself. It's heavily implied that the Maesters, together with Otto, are complicit in making Viserys' illness worse, and it could seem that Alicent is in it too, which would be something that I would like. For her to actually be resentful of her husband, who martially raped her and disrespected her on several occasions. But then all of this is undone during the family dinner. Alicent, who spent years trying to undermine Rhaenyra, now claims that she believes she will make a good queen, and all the animosity disappears. If only this scene was framed as something that they only do for a show for a dying Viserys, then it would make sense, but it's clearly not that, and as such contradicts years of Alicent's previous behavior. The conclusion of Alicent's inconsistency reaches its peak in episode 9. Viserys officially dies, and not only does Alicent mourn him, it is made extremely clear that, even if there was attempts at poisoning him, she was not on board. Additionally, the Green Council scene has her be baffled that there were plans to crown Aegon all along, ones that she was apparently unaware of. Her, who in episode 6 stated clearly that Aegon is a challenge to Rhaenyra's claim and must fight for it, is unaware that such plans were going on.
You are the challenge! You are the challenge, Aegon! Simply by living and breathing!
Am I to understand that members of the small council have been planning secretly to install my son without me?
My queen.
Not to mention that Alicent only supposedly goes along with the plan to crown Aegon because she misunderstood what Viserys said in his dying moments, and not because this is something she wanted to do and planned for years. At some point, trying to add nuance by making the entire thing be a misunderstanding is a cheap writing technique. You only use it if you're too inept as a writer to create actual conflict. Characters flip-flopping in between their clearly established motivations in the span of several episodes is bad writing. It's also bad writing to imply that Alicent is practically ruling the realm by herself and then force her to get sexually harassed in exchange for information. Is she ruling the kingdom by herself or not? Is she powerful or not? Is she the leader of the Green faction or is she merely a pawn to her evil father? You get a different answer depending on which scene of which episode you see. You could add nuance and dimension to Alicent's character without aging her down and messing up the entire timeline. For example, make Alicent a lady-in-waiting to Aemma, someone Rhaenyra likes, looks up to and respects. After Viserys murders Aemma, yes, this is what he does, have Alicent be the one person who can reach towards Rhaenyra and console her in her grief. Make Rhaenyra both overjoyed and conflicted to have Alicent as a genuine mother, and then make their relationship turn sour. Keep Alicent as an antagonist. Don't make her flip-flop in between episodes. Make her hell-bent on making Aegon the king. Make her the woman for Trump you claim she is. And one more thing. Rhaenyscent isn't happening. It is a textbook example of queerbaiting, with the cast and showrunners dropping hints during interviews in order to lure the audience, but there is no way in hell this ever becomes canon. You got queerbaited. Both Alicent and Rhaenyra are straight, and that's okay. If you try to hit on Alicent, she will call you a slur. Over the centuries, House Targaryen has produced both great men and monsters. Prince Daemon was both. In his day there was not a man so admired, so beloved, and so reviled in all Westeros. He was made of light and darkness in equal parts. To some he was a hero, to others the blackest of villains. This quote is a perfect encapsulation of the character of Daemon Targaryen. It is precisely what makes him such a compelling character. Sure, he does his fair share of heinous things, but he does follow his own set of moral standards and is endlessly devoted to his family. The duality of Daemon's character as someone who was both evil and heroic at the same time, the greatest character in the entire Planetos, was completely erased in the show in favor of making Daemon a designated Team Black villain. Various changes to his character compared to his book counterpart made it impossible for many people to genuinely like and root for him, even during his most heroic moments. Show Daemon kills his first wife, an act that is indefensible no matter how you look at it, whereas in the books it's stated by several sources that by the time Rhea Royce has a riding accident, Daemon is still fighting in the Stepstones. Therefore it is physically impossible for him to be the culprit. This is not something that can be explained by Fire and Blood being unreliable. It's one of the aspects of the story that is not put up to interpretation, just like character ages and the fundamental nature of their relationships. It was something that was added on a whim by showrunners in order to make people dislike or turn against Daemon. There is no mention of Daemon ever being abusive to Rhaenyra, and yet he chokes her during one of the scenes in episode 10, another indefensive act. In the books, Daemon fights a duel for Laena's hand, something that was cut from the show or never recorded in the first place. His love for Laena is clear to anyone who read Fire and Blood. Yet in the show, he disregards her wishes to return to Driftmark. He makes it clear that she is not his first choice. He ignores one of his daughters because her egg hasn't yet hatched. A scene of him comforting his daughters after Laena's death was cut. Such drastic changes cannot be explained by unreliable narrators. It is a matter of deliberate writing in order to make Daemon seem more villainous than he actually is. Daemon is made to be Otto to Rhaenyra's Alicent, someone he uses to further his agenda and his ambition, while she remains passive in all of this, because men act and women are. It's men's ambitions that drive the story rather than women's. Interviews with showrunners show the disconnect they have with the audience. Nobody thinks that Daemon is a good guy. Quite the opposite, he is such a light character precisely because he is not a good person, and yet has his own moments of heroism and his very own moral conduct. Moreover, Daemon is not a villain. He is made of darkness and light in equal measure, and that is why so many people are drawn to him. Upon first learning that the Velaryons are going to be black, I was very happy but also worried how they're going to handle it. And all of my worries were unfortunately confirmed, because House Velaryon was reduced to nothing but a prop to the main characters. It turns out that their race was not changed for diversity reasons, but specifically to highlight that Joffrey, Jaehaerys and Lucerys are not Laenor's biological children. And because this was the only reason, nobody bothered to make them characters rather than plot devices. It is especially visible with Laena. In order to make the Alicent and Rhaenyra childhood friends subplot to work, Laena's significance had to be downplayed. Laena and Rhaenyra are best friends in the book. It's even implied that they might have something more going on. But in the show, they don't have any relationship whatsoever, and all of that was given to Alicent. Moreover, Laena's importance as her own character was also downplayed. There was a scene of 12-year-old Laena claiming Vhagar, the biggest dragon in the world, but it was cut. Showrunners explained that because Aemond later climbs Vhagar, the scene was cut to make Aemond moments more special. Make of that what you want. Laena is unhappily married to Daemon, who disregards her wishes of returning to Driftmark and ignores one of her daughters, which I mentioned previously. But by far the most outrageous change from the books was how they handled her death. In the books, Laena gives birth to a child with birth defects and realizes she will die, so she tries to reach Vhagar and fly one last time before collapsing and dying on the staircase. Rhaenyra and Daemon, respectively her best friend and her husband, stay vigilant next to her corpse. However, in the show, once it becomes clear that she will die, she reaches Vhagar and commits suicide by dragonfire. Her death thus becomes much more violent and painful. To summarize, upon changing Laena's race from white to black, her importance to Rhaenyra was erased in favor of creating friendship between Alicent and Rhaenyra that wasn't there in the beginning. Her and Daemon's love was erased. She was stuck in a loveless marriage, aware of being Daemon's second choice, and her wishes to return home disregarded. And while dying, her body was subjected to extreme violence. It was not in the books. The optics of this are terrible, and it becomes even more damning once you remember that she was not made black for diversity reasons. She was black by association, because it has to be constantly highlighted that her brother's sons are not biologically his. And secondly, upon becoming black, her importance was diminished, and she was subjected to more violence than her white counterpart. This is misogyny at its finest. Rhaenyra in the show and Rhaenyra in the books at this point only share a name. Something similar as with Alicent happened, namely, both of these women stopped being the leaders of their respective factions and instead became mere pawns of the men around them, Alicent to Otto and Rhaenyra to Daemon. Rhaenyra is ambitious. She wants the throne. She is the one who wishes to go to war. Here again, it seems like Rhaenyra's motivations flip-flop in between episodes. In Driftmark, Rhaenyra is well aware that the Greens are plotting to downplay her and is prepared for the prospect of war. She is the one to say to Daemon that she needs him by her side once that happens.
I need you, Uncle. Casta ti merpin ay uragon kostundawr.
But in The Black Queen, it's Daemon who convinces Rhaenyra to fight for her rights.
Does the promise of war excite you?
You cannot bend the knee to the High Towers. They stole your birthright.
If you could take the Iron Throne without putting Otto Hightower's head on a spike, would you?
Are you not angry?
Well, I should declare war because I'm angry.
No, because it's your duty as queen to crush rebellion.
And Rhaenyra even at some point says that Daemon went to plot his war. Not her. His. The death of Visenya should have hardened Rhaenyra against the Greens, but she gets teary-eyed when Otto gives her a page from a book in order to remind her of the old friendship with Alicent, something that, to me, reeks of cheap manipulation. The showrunners even went as far as to say that, even after Lucerys' death, there is still hope for reconciliation.
When Vhagar chomps on Lucerys,
yeah, that's the big one.
It's certainly there's no turning back at that point, but is there any point up until then?
It's really hard to say because it comes down to who do you think that point of no return is for. So if it's for Alicent and Rhaenyra, I think there's actually still hope, even with Luke's death. The problem,
which prompts me to believe that the last shot of Rhaenyra actually means nothing, given that character inconsistency is a repeated pattern in the first season. I do not have problems with Rhaenyra having doubts, especially because of the prophecy. I do have problems with her agency being diminished, of her ambition being diminished, of her war becoming Daemon's war. Aside from the inconsistencies in characters, the rules of the universe also seem to bend to the whims of the plot, and not the other way around as it should be. By far the biggest example of this is Aemond losing control of Vhagar and accidentally killing Lucerys. This is another change from the books that does not make sense and contradicts his character. It was made clear several times that Aemond has murderous intent towards Lucerys. Aemond chases Lucerys on the biggest dragon in the world while taunting him and laughing maniacally, and I'm supposed to believe his intent was not to kill him. What was it then? This also contradicts the lore of dragon riding. There are very few examples of dragons disobeying their riders. When it happened, it was usually because of some higher force or because the rider and the dragon were not bonded. Silver Ring refused to go north of the wall because the magic in it prevented it. Syrax did not obey Joffrey's commands because they were not bonded. Balerion did not listen to Aerea's commands because they were not fully bonded. Drogon did not listen to Daenerys' commands because they were not fully bonded. In order to add completely unnecessary change of Aemond accidentally killing Lucerys, this is thrown out of the window and destroys the entire world building. If dragons can disobey their riders, then why was Valyria such a formidable empire? Why was the conquest of Westeros successful? Judging by the fact that both Arrax and Vhagar disobeyed their riders, this is a common occurrence in the show version of the world. Therefore, House Targaryen and Valyrians never should have amassed the power they did, because their mounts constantly disobeyed them. And it does not matter to me that Viserys says, "The idea that we control the dragon is an illusion." This again is a show-only line and does not hold much weight considering that Viserys was not really a dragon rider. He claimed Balerion and rode him twice, so he knows very little of how these things work, or should work in a consistent universe. In a better show, this line would be a meta-commentary of Viserys' weaknesses as a king. His constant unwillingness to use his house's biggest strength to his advantage, for example in the Stepstones. But apparently this show does not have meta-commentary, and everything should be taken at face value. It is also mind-blowingly stupid to say that this is because the dragon is not a slave. A quote that is said in a completely different scene, in a completely different context, to illustrate a completely different point. Daenerys says this not because she claims her dragons are uncontrollable beasts, but because Krasnys monarch Los thought that he can command a dragon like he commands his slave. This has nothing to do with dragon-dragon rider bond, nor is it a commentary on this particular subject. I do not hold the fundamental misunderstanding of the Dance of the Dragons against the showrunners, considering that the large portion of the fans are also willfully unaware of it. You see, the Dance of the Dragons is a Rorschach test. We have two potential claimants to the throne, Rhaenyra Targaryen, the oldest child of King Viserys Targaryen, and Aegon Targaryen, his oldest son. Viserys only had one child with his first wife, and that was Rhaenyra. Aemma died in childbirth, and Viserys did not have a male heir, so he named his daughter, which was against precedence, especially since previously Rhaenys Targaryen was passed over as a potential queen on the basis of her gender. Viserys then remarried, and with Alicent Hightower he finally had a son. However, he refused to alter the succession and kept Rhaenyra as his heir, which prompted Alicent and her father Otto to conspire in order to crown Aegon. Once Viserys dies, Otto and Alicent crown Aegon, saying that the son should be ahead of the daughter. Rhaenyra refuses to comply, and a bloody civil war follows. Dragons go extinct. Now, the enlightened neutral experts of A Song of Ice and Fire would have you believe that both Rhaenyra and Aegon bad, the story nuanced, you're not meant to root for anyone, both awful, both war crimes. There's no reason to cheer for anyone because they're both absolute monarchs reigning over a feudal state. Some go as far as to say that had Rhaenyra just given up her claim, the dragons would still be around and everything would be better. But why doesn't this apply to Aegon? If he wasn't crowned, there wouldn't be a problem. Rhaenyra would have ruled the realm and the dragons would have survived. She could not rule because she was usurped, and only because she was a woman. Only because the Green faction knew they could get away with it because she was a woman. Had Rhaenyra been a man all along, nobody would dare to question her inheritance, even if Alicent had 20 sons. But such questioning was possible because Rhaenyra was a woman. And that is nothing short of pure, unfiltered misogyny. Believing that a man should be ahead of a woman in the line of succession is misogynistic. But well, you could say that it wasn't the reasons but the fact that Rhaenyra was a bad ruler. Again, Aegon was not much better. Not only was Rhaenyra forced to fight a war, after she actually conquered King's Landing, she was left with contradictions, left there by Aegon, such as the fact that he depleted the crown's treasure. And then again, none of that would have happened if she wasn't usurped in the first place. We actually did not have any meaningful sample of how good or bad ruler Rhaenyra could have been. And Aegon did not usurp her because she was an evil tyrant. He usurped her because she was a woman. Once again, this is misogyny. Another argument for Rhaenyra's unfitness to rule is that she does not conform to the roles assigned to her by the society she lives in, for example by having premarital sex, and even 3 bastard sons. In the show, it's made abundantly clear that they are Harwins, even though the book leaves the matter more vague. So, having premarital sex and illegitimate children is enough to render Rhaenyra unfit to rule in the eyes of people who go against her. Even if the show itself makes a commentary that she cannot do as much as men because she is a woman.
Were I born a man, I could bear Tim if I wanted. I could father a dozen bastards, and no one in your court would blink an eye.
You're right. But you were born a woman.
Even the whole she tried to pass her bastards as legitimate sons does not make sense, because Laenor claimed them as his, and Viserys considered them legitimate, even when deep down they both knew they are not Laenor's. Now, let us for a moment reverse the gender of Rhaenyra. And what happens? Nothing happens. And by nothing, I mean nothing. The dance does not happen, because nobody would dare to question Rhaenyra's inheritance if she was a man. But for the sake of argument, let's for a moment pretend that Rhaenyra is born a man, and Aegon and Tim Green do challenge her claim. Something like this actually happens in A Song of Ice and Fire, with Stannis Baratheon, who is usurped by his younger brother, and everyone believes it to be grave injustice. Yet when Rhaenyra is usurped by her younger brother, this is suddenly nuanced. I'm sure that if Rhaenyra was a man, she would be as beloved as Stannis, if not more. If Rhaenyra had bastard sons and legitimized them, nobody would ever bring it up. Her legitimacy would not be questioned, even if she had 10 strong boys and not 3. This is because men's sexual lives are not scrutinized like they are in the case of women. If male Rhaenyra ordered blood and cheese, it would be held as divine justice, something she had every right to do. Every father would have ordered murder for his children. If male Rhaenyra was forced to flee King's Landing because the Greens depleted the crown's treasure, this would rightfully be considered the fault of the Greens, who left the capital in ruin. It would not make Rhaenyra inherently unfit to rule. And yet we have the same discussion all over again with Rhaenyra. The mistakes she makes as a person and as a ruler are held against her. She is criticized extremely harshly for every single one of her missteps, and of course used as proof that she was usurped rightfully, or that somehow this is enough to make the story nuanced. But Rhaenyra was usurped solely because she was a woman. It is made abundantly clear that she would have been usurped even if she had Laenor's children, even if she didn't have sex outside of marriage, even if, Otto Hightower's words, she was King Jaehaerys reborn. Otto began plotting to depose her the second she was named heir, and could only get away with it because she is a woman. Like I said, there would be no dance if Rhaenyra was a man. Therefore, there is a right side of the dance, and that side is the Blacks, the ones who were wronged, the ones who were usurped, and on the basis of misogyny alone. Rooting for the side that's inherently misogynistic also makes you a misogynist. Denying the reality of Rhaenyra's usurpation and saying that it's nuanced also makes you a misogynist. Sorry that you had to learn it that way. And yet the showrunners fell into the trap themselves. It is already established that Ryan Condal does not want the show watchers to take sides, even though if we have a story of this sort, people will subconsciously make those choices. And here lies the crux of it. All of the changes, all of the inconsistencies, all of the problems that I outlined before are there for this very reason. The showrunners did not understand the Blacks are the right side, that the story is fundamentally about misogyny, and that there really is no nuance here. If that wasn't the case, you would be able to adapt the story as it is, without adding personality traits and motivations for the Greens that they didn't have in the books, and fans would have naturally gravitated towards them on their own volition. Yet before House of the Dragon, there existed no die-hard Green fans. They only meaningfully appeared after Condal and company decided to do their both sides bad thesis, and make their side far more sympathetic. That is because if they were adapted properly, nobody would root for them nor like them, because you are not meant to do that at all. Greens are inherently unsympathetic as characters. They do not even have the iconic and charismatic supporters the Blacks have. Why did such a skilled writer as George R.R. Martin make all the Greens so one-dimensional? Maybe there is a reason for that. Maybe the reason is that Rhaenyra and her team are protagonists, and that the Greens are antagonists and unsympathetic. Maybe that is why Rhaenyra and the Blacks are still much more liked. In order to force this line of thought about how both sides equally bad, the whole core of the story was altered. So maybe that was not the intended message after all. The show is so far at the very beginning of the story, and while some changes cannot be undone, they can be fixed and mended in the following seasons. Unfortunately, it does not seem very likely, considering that the showrunners are hell-bent on their both sides bad thesis. We may expect even more inconsistencies in the following seasons, and like with Game of Thrones, they will pile and pile and pile, and more contradictions will appear, and the changes will have a butterfly effect that will explode in our faces in the final season. I made more analysis on other aspects of the show that did not fit into this video, so if you want to read them, check the link in the description. That is all from me. I don't think I will ever make a similar video, so enjoy this one to the fullest.